Hey, do you teach yoga? Have you ever trained to lead yoga classes, to be a yoga therapist? Have you ever owned a yoga studio? Maybe even just wondered what it was like for the women and men up there in front of the room on their mats, leading you through endless Surya Namaskars, down dogs, and pranayamas galore? Well, these are their stories, and mine. I'm Rebecca Sebastian, a 20-year yoga teacher, 10-year yoga therapist, yoga studio owner, and co-founder of a yoga-focused nonprofit. I've done a lot in the yoga world over the last 20 years, pretty much everything except had a water cooler. You know, a place to share stories, talk about struggles, successes, and find other people who do the same thing that I do. Welcome to Working in Yoga, a podcast and substitute water cooler for yoga folks to connect and build community, to share our unique profession, our challenges, and our journeys with the world.
Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. I'm Rebecca Sebastian, and this is the show where we talk about yoga the way people who actually work in it talk about it, without the soft focus filter. Today is a particular kind of episode for me. It's part retrospective and part preview. We published the first Yoga Professionals Trend Forecast back at the end of last year in the winter of 2025, and I want to come back to it. Not to congratulate myself about what landed, not to walk anything back, but because it's important that we treat this industry with enough seriousness to actually track what's happening over time. And at the end of this episode, I'm going to give you a taste of where we're headed for the next forecast, the summer 2026 edition. I'm not going to hand you the whole thing, of course, but I'll tell you this. What I'm seeing now is sharper and in some ways more uncomfortable than what I said in December. So stick around. Now, before we get into it, if you haven't checked out Inside Yoga Magazine yet, it's the trade publication that I run specifically for yoga professionals. It's not for students. It's not for the wellness consumer in general. It's for us. It is real analysis, real business coverage, and you can find it linked in the show notes. I want to start by saying something that sounds simple, but I think actually really matters. We made this forecast because our industry doesn't have one. That's the simple statement. But I want you to think about it for a second. Almost every other industry that has a workforce the size of ours, that employs hundreds of thousands of people across the globe, that generates billions of dollars annually, has trade data and employment research and labor analysis and industry publications that actually cover the business of doing the work. And we have certification sales numbers and Instagram. And so when I published the winter 2025 forecast, it wasn't me necessarily predicting the future, but it was me saying, here's what the data I do have access to says, and here's what I'm hearing from practitioners across the country, and here's what it looks like when you put it all together and actually look at it. The response from y'all told me a lot. People weren't surprised by a lot of what I said, but they were relieved that someone actually said it out loud. And that's a pretty powerful distinction, actually, between those two things. When your reaction to industry analysis is relief rather than revelation, that tells us that the analysis was overdue. So let's go back through what we covered in December, and I want to be honest about where I think we are 6 months later. We identified 6 primary trends in the winter forecast. I'm going to walk through them, but what I'm not going to do is read them to you. You can get the full report at thesunlightexperience.com in our shop. And what I want to do is update them and give you an idea of where I think each one sits right now. So trend number 1 was the professional promise has shifted. This was the foundation of the whole report. The argument is pretty straightforward, that for decades we were told that going deeper with more training, more credentials, and more specialization would translate to stable work and professional recognition. And for a lot of us, it frankly didn't. And I said this wasn't a personal failure. It was a structural one. In fact, I keep saying this over and over again. The industry sold education faster than it built employment. There's a word for that or a phrase for that. credential inflation without job creation. And I got to tell you, I stand by every single word of that. 6 months later, what I'm seeing is that this conversation has cracked open in a lot of ways that I didn't fully expect. More yoga therapists are talking about this publicly. More teachers are naming it. And the shame around our experiences involving this is kind of like loosening slowly, I think. But it's one of the more important things that can happen in a field that has historically dealt with economic struggle by reframing it as spiritual practice. I also think that we're seeing downstream effects of this trend accelerating in ways that lead directly to the new forecast. But I'll get into that in a little bit. Trend number 2 that I identified from December was from yoga roles to transferable skills. And this is probably the trend that got the most resonance with people and also kind of the most pushback in equal measure, which told me that it hit a nerve, something real. The argument that I made was a growing number of yoga professionals, particularly those with training in therapeutic applications, meditation, and nervous system work, were recognizing that their skills translate into corporate wellness, education, elder care, and athletics. That skill migration isn't an exit from yoga, it's an expansion of where yoga goes. And the pushback I heard was essentially, aren't we just giving our work away to institutions that will strip the context and exploit our labor? That is a fair concern. But it also leads to trend 3 that I identified, which is reclaiming the context in an extractive wellness economy. This one was about the difference between skill migration as translation versus skill migration as extraction. The argument was that yoga's philosophical and ethical frameworks aren't decoration. They're the whole thing. And as yoga professionals move into new spaces, the professionals who carry the whole tradition with them are doing something categorically different from those who just export the techniques. Now, I think this trend is still unfolding, and I don't think I figured it out quite yet. But what I do think is that the teachers who are going to matter in 5 years are the ones that are taking this question seriously right now, not as a marketing angle necessarily, but as an actual practitioner question. Now, trend 4 for the winter forecast was yoga therapy is in an identity and leadership crisis. Now, I am definitely not walking this one back at all. It was spot on, and if anything, the last 6 months have made me more certain about it. The field continues to struggle with an unresolved question of what it actually is. Is it a profession, a specialization, a philosophical orientation? And the governing bodies have not provided clarity. And in fact, in the last month alone, have claimed to have no desire to provide clarity for the workers. They have not provided clarity on scope of practice, on advocacy at all, and on what yoga therapists are actually supposed to do when they encounter the structural realities of trying to make a living. What I'm watching from the workers in the yoga therapy space is what I'm going to call quiet attrition. It's not like a mass exit necessarily. That happened sort of at the beginning of 2025. It's not a public reckoning, again, that happened quite a lot in 2025, but individual practitioners who are deeply trained and philosophically serious, genuinely skilled, are slowly reorienting themselves away from formal yoga therapy structures and toward work that actually supports them. And there's no big hullabaloo or fanfare involved. They're not going to burn it all down. They're just leaving. And I think that quiet exit is one of the more important data points that we have about the state of the yoga therapy field right now. There's going to be more about this in the new forecast. Now, trend 5 that I identified was integration is becoming the new baseline. This one has continued to accelerate, actually, and the studios are where I'm seeing this accelerate at a rapid pace. The studios that are surviving, and I want to be precise about that word, surviving, are the ones that have integrated. They also have strength training and nervous system regulation across all class types. There are somatic approaches in those studios that 5 years ago would have been considered really niche. And what I want to flag is something that I'll come back to in the new forecast. Integration as survival strategy is different from integration as a growth strategy. And I think we're conflating the two in ways that are going to matter in the next 4 years. And the last trend that I identified in the winter was the limits of niching as a solution. You may have heard me talk about this in the podcast before because the find your niche advice kind of drives me crazy. But the argument here was that find your niche has become a placeholder for actual industry infrastructure. And what we've been telling individual workers is to solve systemic labor problems with increasingly narrow personal branding. And that while niching works in specific contexts, I really do think that's true, like particularly digital and online contexts, it does not work as a universal substitute for functioning employment models. 6 months later, I think this trend has actually sharpened into something that I am going to give real time to in the new forecast. Because what I'm seeing is not just the limits of niching, I'm seeing something bigger. The model that niching was supposed to stabilize, which we'll call the portfolio career or the portable yoga professional, I think that model in itself is like in real trouble. Like not just strained, but structurally it is compromised. And that's what I want to spend time in on the second half of this episode. Now, before we get there, a quick break. This is the moment in the episode that I tell you that Inside Yoga Magazine, and I mean it when I say it is relevant to exactly what we're talking about. Everything I just recapped and everything I'm about to get into is the kind of analysis that I'm building a full publication around. Industry trends, business coverage, real reporting that's actually happening in yoga workplaces. Not content for your students, content for you and context for you as the professional. If you're listening to the show, Inside Yoga Magazine exists for you. It's at InsideYogaMagazine.com. Check it out. Okay, so let's talk about where we're going. I'm not going to give you the full summary of the summer forecast today. That's coming, and I want you to read the whole thing when it does. But I want to give you a sense of the terrain. And I want to spend some real time on one trend in particular that I think represents the single most important shift in how we think about building a career in yoga right now. So the headline of the summer 2026 forecast, and I'm just going to say it plainly, is that the yoga boom is over. It's not declining, it's over. And we need to start making our decisions accordingly. Now, I know that it's going to land differently for different people who are listening, this idea. Some of you have been feeling this for years, and you'll hear that sentence and be like, yeah, obviously, and then have this big, nice exhale. Some of you are going to push back, and I want to address some of that pushback preemptively. So yes, the yoga and wellness market is still growing in dollar terms. Yes, there are market research reports that are citing billion-dollar projections. I know those numbers. I've read those charts. And here's what I want to say about them. Yoga teachers are reading the wrong part. The overall wellness economy is expanding, and that does not mean that the yoga economy is expanding in the ways that benefit yoga professionals. It means that more capital is flowing into wellness. Some of that capital is going into yoga adjacent spaces. A lot of it, for example, right now is going to Pilates, which has absorbed a significant portion of what used to be the yoga market share. Some of it is going to corporate wellness programs that have extracted yoga's tools while reducing yoga's overall role. And the rising tide is not lifting all ships. And when we cite aggregate wellness market numbers as evidence that yoga is doing fine, we are misleading ourselves. The boom, the thing that created the conditions that we all trained in, the thing that built the credentialing ecosystem, the thing that made yoga teacher feel like a viable full-time identity, that specific phenomenon has ended. And what comes next is something different and smaller and leaner in some ways and a lot richer in others. But definitely different. And the professionals who are going to navigate it well are the ones who accept that first. Now, the next sort of trend that I'm talking about in this new report is the online shift. Online has become a more significant player in the market than most in-person focused practitioners are willing to reckon with. And I don't mean that in an aspirational, like build your digital brand kind of sense. I mean it structurally, because students are accessing yoga differently than they were even 3 years ago. The pandemic accelerated the online shift, and it did not fully reverse after pandemic restrictions opened up. Some of it became permanent. This has implications for how we think about in-person work and pricing and what students actually expect when they show up. But again, I'm going to go deeper into that when I launch the forecast. The next one I'm talking about is yoga therapy as a construction project. A callback to that earlier winter forecast that I did. I talked about yoga therapy's identity and leadership crisis in December, but the summer forecast goes somewhere more specific. What I'm calling this trend is yoga therapy as a construction project for the workers themselves, meaning the practitioners who remain in the field after this period of attrition or leaving are not going to inherit a built profession. They're going to have to build it from labor organizing and peer advocacy and from the ground up. The organizations in the last 6 months have said very outright they won't build it for us. And the question is whether the people who are still here have the appetite for that and whether the structures that exist are going to help them or get in the way. Up next is my favorite trend because I have a special place in my heart for this kind of work. But the next trend I'm seeing is community-led organizing. And this connects directly to that previous trend, but it's bigger than yoga therapy. What I'm watching across the profession is a genuine shift towards peer networks as the functional unit of professional support. Not the Yoga Alliance, not the International Association of Yoga Therapists, not your training school, but the group chat, the regional cohort, the informal collective of yoga therapists in a city or state who are figuring out referral networks and scope of practice questions together without waiting for anyone to hand them a roadmap. This is actually meaningful. Horizontal organizing within professions that have been abandoned by their governing bodies. This is how fields reconstitute themselves. I want to name it as a trend because I think it deserves to be taken seriously as structural development, not just as community connection. The next thing I'm seeing and talking about is business sense matters as much as energetic sense. I have a lot of feelings about this one, and I'll give it really proper space in the full forecast. But the short version is this. Our field has over-indexed on the ability to read the room energetically and very much under-indexed on the ability to run a business. And those two things aren't in conflict. That's the important part that we need to know. They never were in conflict. But somewhere along the way, financial literacy and business acumen got coded as being in tension with authenticity or spiritual integrity. And that framing has cost us quite a lot. The menopause shift. This one is happening whether the yoga industry acknowledges it or not. It has been a trend all over wellness in 2026, and a significant portion of yoga teaching workforce members are coming on or are in perimenopause or menopause. They are also, in many cases, the people with the most experience, the most clinical training, and the most professional authority in our field. And they're increasingly creating content, programming, and educational frameworks specifically for the perimenopausal and menopausal population, because they are this population and because the need is enormous and largely unmet by existing health and wellness infrastructure. I think this one is going to be more interesting, creative, and professional opportunities that I see in the field right now. More on this in the full report. Before I get into the trend that I want to spend the most time on today, I want to tell you about the Backroom. The Backroom is my membership for yoga professionals who are serious about staying in this industry. It's not a course. It's not coaching. It's a place where you can actually go to work on your relationship with your work. There are monthly tools, there are deep guides, there's a community, there's my active presence in the room. It's organized around where you actually are in your career, whether that's questioning whether you're going to stay or committing to staying but needing some traction, or building something long-term, or navigating a yoga therapy career without a map. And right now, specifically for this launch party that I had on May 15th, I'm offering a founding bundle. The back room plus the full Inside Yoga Magazine subscription together for $197 a year. If you've been listening to the show and thinking, I need more of this, the bundle is the more of this. The magazine, the back room, the industry report, and you get industry analysis, and the back room also gives you the tools to do something with it. The link is in the show notes. Come on up to the house, pull up a seat at our table, and let's go talk about our portable careers. So I want to give this one trend coming up for the new forecast its full due because I think it's the most significant thing that I have to say about where we are. In December, I talked about skill migration, which you heard me talk about earlier, the first wave of yoga professionals who took their transferable skills into medical facilities and corporations and educational spaces and adjacent wellness spaces. Teachers who recognized that their competencies extended beyond traditional yoga environments and followed that recognition into different institutional contexts. I stand by that. That happened. It's still happening. But there's this second reckoning, I think, that's happening now, and it's happening to the people who stayed, the ones who chose this industry, who kept teaching and kept building. And what they're discovering is that the model they were building within, a model that I'm calling the portable career, is no longer viable in the way that it once was. The portable career, especially in the 2010s, had a logic to it. You niche something, then you build a workshop around it, and maybe you write something, whether it's a workbook or a full book. You create a training, you develop an online offer. Maybe you move across studios and across cities and across formats. It's that solopreneur model, the hustle model, essentially, the personal brand as the professional infrastructure model. And it really had a certain coherence in the 2010s, and it rewarded a particular kind of flexibility and a particular kind of relentlessness. And what I'm seeing now is the middle dropping out of that model. The industry is not contracting like uniformly. It's stratifying, and that means that it's splitting into distinct tiers with very little movement between them. There is a very small group of yoga professionals with substantial platforms, significant online followings, multiple revenue streams, and the runway to sustain them. And then there is everyone else. And the everyone else category, which is the vast majority of working yoga teachers, is discovering that the middle ground where you could build a modest but sustainable living through that portfolio model is increasingly precarious. And here's the part I want to sit with. The response to this cannot be another niche. The response to this cannot be a better brand strategy or a more optimized social media presence. We have given that advice for too long, and it has not solved the problem because it was never equipped to solve the problem. What I'm watching and what I want to name as a genuine counter trend is a move toward rootedness, towards relationship, toward being genuinely, deeply, comprehensively good at the whole of yoga. Not a niche version of it, not a stripped down, market ready version of it, at the whole of it. Because here's what I think happened in the 2010s. We've stripped yoga for its parts like it was a car. I've said this a lot of times on this podcast and online. But it worked for a while. Like, we have to say that because the boom was big enough that you can make a living selling a corner of the practice to an audience that didn't know what else was available, whether it's breathwork or yin or yoga for athletes or trauma-sensitive yoga or yoga nidra. Those are real and valuable, and they are also, in many cases, ways of packaging a piece of the tradition and hoping that piece was enough. The teachers I'm watching build durable careers right now, and I want to be honest that this is a smaller group than we'd like, but they're the ones who are putting it back together. The philosophy, the breathing, the movement, the relational and contemplative dimensions of the practice, the wholeness of it. And that wholeness is genuinely difficult to replicate in other disciplines. They can't compete with us. Pilates cannot do what yoga does. Corporate wellness cannot do what yoga does. A somatic fitness class can't do what yoga does. The thing yoga does, and when it's done with full integrity and real depth, is not portable in the sense that it can be picked up and marketed by any wellness provider. It is specific and irreplaceable. And the professionals who are working from that depth are the ones who are going to find that their work travels, not because they branded themselves cleverly, but because that what they offer is genuinely singular and unique. That is not a guarantee of economic stability, of course. I'm not offering you false comfort, and I don't want you to hear it that way. Our structural problems are real, and they require real structural responses. Responses like collectively organizing, better advocacy, and a serious reckoning with what yoga work actually pays. But at the level of individual professional development, I think the most honest thing that I can say is go deeper, not narrower. The portable career, the model built on the promise that could make yoga work by slicing it thin enough and selling it broadly enough, that model is ending, my friends. What replaces it is not another version of the same strategy. It is a different orientation entirely. Rootedness over portability, wholeness over specialization, and relationship over reach. I don't think this is the ending of something. I think it's the beginning of something that we actually want. Okay, that's the shape of what's coming in the summer 2026 forecast. There are more trends than what I got into today, actually. There are several that I didn't list. And when the full report drops, I'll give each of them space on the podcast that they deserve. But if you want the winter 2025 forecast, the full thing, you can find it at thesunlightexperience.com/shop and read the whole thing. It's the foundation of everything that I said today. If any of this is landing for you and you're recognizing that your own situation is what I described, the bundle is the place to go. Inside Yoga Magazine and the Backroom together at that sort of founding rate, available for the whole summer. The link is in the show notes. And if you've been a listener for a while and you find value in the show, the most useful thing that you can do for me is to leave a review or share this episode with someone who works in yoga and needs to hear it. Or just tell me that it's resonating, because I do read everything. Now, let's go get to work, my friends, and I will catch you around the water cooler next time.